Okay, nothing's working today. All right, good morning. First off, can you hear me? There we go. Okay, good morning. First off, I'd like to just thank all the organizers for putting this on and for inviting me to be here with you today. It's truly an honor to come here and to speak with you all, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation. So this is Ashley Madison, Cybersecurity in a World of Discretion. Or at least that's the title that the PR team let me put on here. But in the hotel last night, I decided to change it to the non-working Windows laptop. Nope. All right, there goes the big reveal. It's not going to skip ahead, though. Okay, well, there's the new title anyway, so we're stuck on that slide. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. That's a Mike Tyson quote, and that appropriately describes what happened to us. So my name is Matthew Maglieri. I'm the Chief Security Officer at Ruby. We are the parent company to Ashley Madison, amongst several other dating websites. I've been with Ruby for about 3 years now. Prior to that, I served in a lead role helping build Mandiant's Canadian practice, primarily focused on offensive red team operations, as well as strategic SOC development and design engagements. Been with Ruby for about 3 years. We're based in Toronto, we're Canadian, and I'm here with you today to share what I believe to be is a rarely discussed perspective. That of an organization who has gone through the worst case scenario, a headline-grabbing breach, and to share the lessons learned from that incident with you so we can begin to tackle the fundamental question of how do we achieve breach prevention? Or, perhaps more appropriately, is breach prevention even possible? So I've got my coordinates up here. Please feel free to reach out and connect or come up and find me after. I'd love to connect with as many of you as possible, so please don't be shy. All right, sorry about this, guys. Just give me a moment. It's just not working. There we go. All right, as with all good stories, we need to start at the beginning. And the beginning for the context of our discussion today starts with the 2015 hack of Ashley Madison. This incident saw over 30 gigabytes of corporate and customer data stolen from the company and leaked out to the public internet. The impact and fallout to both the business and consumers was profound. There were multiple class action lawsuits. There were 3 different regulatory enforcement actions, one from the Office of the Privacy Commissioner here in Canada, another from the FTC in the United States, and a third from the Australian Information Commissioner. There was a tremendous loss of consumer trust. There was extended and continued negative media exposure. And most importantly and most regrettably, there was tremendous impact to the personal lives of some of our users. And so the company knew that if it was going to survive the incident, and indeed survive as a business, that we would need to become leaders in the privacy and information security space. Because of who we were, because of the nature of the business, it would not be sufficient to do anything less. And so my general counsel and privacy officer and myself, she joined the company around the same time as me, we set ourselves a pretty simple and direct mandate. And that was to build leading privacy and information security programs. And so we got to work. In the immediate aftermath, after the incident response engagement ran down, we worked with Deloitte's Canadian team to perform an ongoing and continuous compromise assessment of the environment to identify any potential continuing evidence of attacker activity. We also deployed a full suite of latest generation network and endpoint security controls, and then fed all those into a new hybrid security operations center, staffed both with internal Ruby resources and out of Deloitte's Cyber Intelligence Center in Montreal. We also completed a full security program redesign, completely overhauling the governance program from the ground up. Next, under PCI, it's a little known fact that if you are subject to PCI compliance and you do suffer a data breach, you are automatically considered a level 1 merchant from that point forward, regardless of your transaction volume, which would typically determine your level of compliance under the DSS standard. So because of our breach, we needed to implement and maintain level 1 PCI compliance, which we've done so for a number of years now. Next, after some of this foundational work was done, we brought in our friends at FireEye and Mandiant to complete a series of proactive assessments, red team engagements, penetration tests, web application assessments, to assess the overall effectiveness of this foundational work. And with that, it gave us a foundation that we needed to begin to tackle some of the concerns of the regulators. So first off, we needed to satisfy the concerns of the Office of the Privacy Commissioner in Canada. And the OPC understandably took a very privacy-centric approach in their enforcement action against the company. And specifically, they wanted to see us augment the privacy protections that we afforded to our customers. So we brought on Chantal Bernier, who is the former interim privacy commissioner, to come on board as Ruby's special privacy advisor for a number of months. We also worked with Dr. Ann Kavukian, who was formerly at Ryerson's Privacy by Design Institute, to augment our privacy program. And through a series of policy, process, security, and many months of work, we worked to align ourselves with the Privacy by Design standard. We then brought in the Privacy by Design Institute to complete an independent mature assessment. And indeed, I'm proud to report that Ruby and Ashley Madison is the first and to date only dating website certified under the Privacy by Design standard. Next, we needed to address the concerns of the FTC. And so the FTC took a much more information security-centric approach in their enforcement action. And they wanted to see us implement a recognized information security standard, align our program with that standard, and then have that implementation assessed for design and effectiveness every 2 years for the next 20 years. So knowing that we were going to be saddled with this framework, whatever we chose, for quite some time, we obviously took our time evaluating the different options. You know, as those of you are familiar with, there are a million different security frameworks, probably way too many. And we ultimately landed on the NIST cybersecurity framework. And so the CSF is unique in some ways, is that it was developed by a consortium of academia, government, and private sector experts. And so the result is a framework that is both thorough and comprehensive, but also tactical and pragmatic enough, incorporating many of the key controls that we felt we wanted to implement anyway to ensure breach resilience. So it took us about 6 months to do the implementation, to align our program, and to completely overhaul what we already had, and to align with the framework. We then brought in Ernst & Young to complete an independent maturity assessment, which we then submitted to the FTC for full compliance. So this work gave us the foundational air support, if you will, to allow the business to begin to resume normal operations. So in 2017, there were around 15,500 unique signups to Ashley Madison every month, or every day, sorry. Works out to be about 500,000 per month. In order to derive at these numbers, we actually brought in an EY assurance team to perform an independent review on the sign-up numbers, the ratio of male to female users, and indeed to certify that certain problematic business practices, such as the use of chatbots and engager profiles, had been shut down several years prior. Should you be interested, the full report is available there. Probably caution against you visiting that link on your corporate devices or workstations, though, however, but should you be interested, it's there. Now, the reality was for myself and my GC and privacy officer, as we looked at these numbers, which now today in 2019 are closer to 30,000 signups a day, and we realized that, well, people are going to continue to use this service. And people are going to continue to sign up in droves, and they're going to entrust us with their personal information. And so we felt a responsibility to stay with and stick with those people and to fight for them and to build and to continue to build and expand our privacy and security programs and to take things to the next level. And specifically around security, we knew that the company was operating in a threat landscape and was going to remain a target, that it wasn't just sufficient to meet the benchmarks set to us by the regulators. We need to go further, and we needed to take it to the next level. So we set ourselves a pretty lofty goal, and that was to build and maintain a leading threat-based, intelligence-led program capable of defending the company against even the most advanced threats. Now, there's a lot in that. And some of you might accuse me of playing buzzword bingo here, but really the reality is what we were trying to do is to understand the threat landscape that we operated in, understand the unique adversaries that we faced as a dating website, as a controversial service offering, understand the tools, tactics, and procedures of those adversaries. How do they do what they do? How do they compromise organizations? And then to build a program capable of defending against them. But, as I'm sure all of us in this room, we are all security leaders or managers or practitioners or students, and we all have the same goal, right? Nobody wants a breach. So it's one thing to set yourself a goal to not be breached and defend against advanced threats, but how do we actually do that? And the unfortunate reality is that every week, multiple breaches are publicly exposed, new ones. It seems like every day we're hearing about something new. I can tell you from my time working at Mandiant, one of the leading incident response firms in the world, that many more breaches are happening every day and every week that are not disclosed. And indeed, Mandiant publishes a report every year called M-Trends, which is sort of a state of the cybersecurity union. That's great. I highly recommend you check it out. It's free. You can download it. But one of the key metrics that Mandiant measures in the M-Trends report is the global median dwell time. So for every investigation that Mandiant has done the year prior, the dwell time measures what was the earliest evidence of attacker activity in that breach to when that breach was ultimately first discovered. Now, when I worked at Mandiant a number of years ago, this number was north of a year. It was between 300 and 400 days, which meant that for the investigations that we were doing, the attacker was typically active for over a year before somebody found out they were there. Now, the great thing is this number has been steadily improving. In 2016 and 2017, it was around 100 days, and then last year it dropped down to 78 days. So it's clear that we are improving as an industry. We are getting better. We are moving the needle, and that's really exciting. The problem is that it often takes a skilled adversary a matter of hours, often just days, sometimes a couple weeks, to compromise your organization and complete their objective. So it's great that we've improved and it's great that we've moved the needle, but if it's still taking us close to 3 months to find targeted attackers in our organizations, well then it's rather moot then. And so I think it's clear that our current approach as defenders, as an industry, is failing. We're not keeping up with the threat. And with that, I'd like to present the argument that breach prevention in its truest form likely isn't possible, but achieving breach resilience is. But before we dive into that, I think we need to explore, well, why is our current approach as an industry failing? Never before have we been spending more time, money, and effort at every level of our organizations on cybersecurity. And yet, the torrent of breaches shows no sign of slowing down. So John Lambert, who's the general manager of the Microsoft Threat Intelligence Center, published a piece a couple years ago now trying to answer this same question. And what John came up with was that defenders think in lists, attackers think in graphs. As long as this is true, attackers win. And what John goes on to describe is a bit of a situation of two realities. The defender reality, unfortunately, being a little bit like the fog of war, where we can see ahead of us and we can see behind us, but we don't know what we don't know. And what's more, we have all these obstacles in our way in our organizations that slow us down and prevent us from achieving the agility and the dynamicism required to combat today's adversary. We have technical debt and legacy systems. We've got a global talent shortage. We've got challenges around burnout and retention of our existing staff. We've got politicized organizations, silos, poor information sharing within large organizations. We've got a seemingly ever-expanding list of compliance and regulatory obligations that we have to comply with, but unfortunately don't do much to actually improve the security of our organizations. And all of this creates and a tremendous disadvantage for us as defenders. I apologize again, we've got some laptop problems. So. All right, on the other hand, the attacker reality is very simple. It's find and exploit the weakest link in your organization, that one employee that didn't attend anti-phishing training, the one laptop that you forgot to patch, the one API server with a misconfiguration and poor authorization or authentication on it. Gain some level of access to your organization, pivot, escalate privileges, and repeat until they fully compromised your organization. And for anybody that's ever spent any time in incident response or red teaming or are familiar with how these attacks often go, the method that, or the route that the attacker will take through your organization is extremely nonlinear. It is very difficult, if not impossible, to model as defenders in our traditional ways of thinking and seeing the world, in firewall rule sets, in risk control matrices, in patch reports. These are all linear representations of information. But to understand the attacker's reality, you need to understand the hacker mindset, which is, this is my current position in a system. I'm going to look around me and explore all the different relationships that other systems nearby have with me. I'm going to move to those systems, no matter how unlikely they might be in terms of achieving my objective. And I'm going to see if there's any way I can escalate my privileges, and I'm going to expand out that way. And so if we try to combat this kind of nonlinear thinking or these offensive tactics with linear controls, then it's going to look a little bit like this graphic here on the right, with that gate being the perfect representation of the latest next generation firewall or expensive blinky security appliance. If we deploy, and that path on the left showing us exactly what the attacker is going to do if we deploy these technologies in a linear fashion without fully understanding the unique vulnerable pathways that exist within our individual environments. And so I think it's clear that we need to evolve. We have to figure out, Blue Team 2.0, so to speak. The old approach isn't working. And the threat landscape that we're all facing, whether you're in oil and gas, technology, financial services, insurance, just starting out, it doesn't matter. We're all facing a threat landscape that has never been more hostile, that has never been more persistent. And the reality is, the unfortunate reality is the cavalry isn't coming. Us in this room and other rooms like it around the country, around the world, we're the only ones responsible for figuring out this problem and solving it. And so the way that we've tried to tackle this at Ruby is through what we call offensive-driven risk management. And so really, all it is a fundamental need to understand the adversaries and their tools, tactics, and procedures, their TTPs. What are the adversaries that we're facing as our unique individual organizations? Who might want to target us? And then what is the up-to-date and latest and greatest information about how those adversaries do what they do? How do they target organizations? What tools do they use? What tactics do they use? And then we can begin to model this behavior pretty accurately, actually. This graphic here is the Mandiant targeted attack lifecycle. It's very much based on the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain. There's lots of life cycles like it, but they all basically try to model the different phases that a targeted attacker moves through when compromising an organization. And so we can use something like this, in our case we do use the Mandiant lifecycle, to break out the individual phases that an attacker will move through, and then to model the attacker's activity in each of those phases, to simulate it and emulate it, and assess our performance against that. And what this looks like is a continuous process of emulation, of proactive testing and adversarial simulation, emulating the tools, tactics, and procedures of the adversary at each individual phase of that life cycle, analyzing our results, performing gap analysis, measuring key metrics such as what was our mean time to detect this simulated incident, what was our mean time to respond, did we improve since the last time we did this a few months ago, how does the staff feel about it, how does the SOC feel about it, did we improve, did we not improve, what did we do right, what did we do wrong. And then adapting, feeding the results of this into control and process enhancement, securing our environment, mitigating vulnerabilities, enhancing our response processes, and then repeating the cycle over and over again continuously. And the key thing here, and the way this differs a little bit, is that some part of your organization should be under friendly attack at all times. So it's no longer sufficient to just go get a pen test done once a year, and you have a couple consultants come in and plug in at a user segment, and you know exactly where they are, and your network guys are watching them the whole time, and you get a report at the end of the day. We need to move to continuous assessment. So we need to be continuously staying up to date with the tools, tactics, and procedures of the adversary. We need to be emulating those in our own environment, assessing our results, and improving. So, okay, great. Well, how do we actually do this? So in the last 3 years or so, we've seen a huge surge in Canadian companies building their own red teams. This is something we always advocated for a number of years ago. It's finally starting to happen, which is very exciting. So these are red teams within the organization that has a mandate and the resources and the authorization to continuously test the organization, continuously attack the organization, and try to find vulnerabilities. If you don't have the resources available to you to do that, you can bring in outside consultants to do this for you. There's a lot of amazing, talented firms that do this. And then next, if you have any kind of internet-facing presence or application whatsoever, I cannot say enough good things about a bug bounty program. So we manage ours through HackerOne. It's one of the providers that offer these programs. There's a number of them. But essentially, for those of you who aren't familiar, a bug bounty program is basically a framework by which you invite researchers around the world to continuously test your sites and services to try to find vulnerabilities, responsibly disclose those to you in exchange for monetary reward. So in our case, we've been at this for about 2.5 years now. We found and fixed 500 vulnerabilities in our sites and services. On the low end, we'll pay about $250 for cross-site scripting. On the high end, for remote code execution, we'll pay around $15,000. But the key wonderful advantage of this is that it's crowdsourced security. Even as I'm standing here talking to you guys, there are a couple thousand, maybe a few hundred researchers around the world testing my sites and services, reporting vulnerabilities, trying to find issues before the bad guys find them and exploit them. And then, of course, facilitated simulations, so tabletop exercises. If you have an incident response plan that's 80 pages long that you haven't tested and you've never opened it and very few people know it exists, it's pretty much worthless. Going back to our impromptu title here, everybody has a plan till you get punched in the mouth. If you haven't tested that plan at a technical level, at a managerial level, and a board level, it's worthless. So bringing in third-party consultants or facilitators to help you run TTXs to test those plans and ensure that we're prepared for a breach. And then, of course, specialized testing as you need it, if OT or SCADA environments or mobile app reverse engineering, whatever you might have, bringing those folks in who have that specialized knowledge to your environment. And then what we can do is we can actually feed the output of these offensive risk management processes into a traditional risk control matrix type of model. So in our case, we're using the Mandiant lifecycle. We've got the phase on the left. We've got the common phase activities in the first column, and then some example controls on the right. And I'll run through this pretty quickly, but basically, the first phase, initial recon. So this is when the attacker is going to try to build a profile, a target profile on your organization. Essentially, they're going to case the joint and try to find out, what does my target look like? What does your company look like? This can involve open source intelligence gathering, checking out all your employees' LinkedIn, seeing if they're sharing information on there that might help them. Are your employees going on LinkedIn, putting specific technology versions in their LinkedIn profiles and sharing that, for example? They're going to perform passive and active port and service scanning, so services like Shodan or Nmap scans to try to map out your network. And so where offensive testing can help us here is it can find many of these issues before the bad guys do. A bug bounty program finding vulnerabilities, open source intelligence simulation or gathering, if you pay a couple consultants to do an OSINT exercise for you and find out what exists and what information is out there on your company before the bad guys find it. Next comes the initial compromise. So this is very often done with social engineering, email phishing, this kind of thing. Occasionally you'll see vulnerability exploitation or internet facing misconfigurations. Again, where offensive testing can help us here bug bounty programs, finding those misconfigurations, phishing exercises, red team exercises, testing how many employees actually clicked on the link, how effective are our security and awareness programs. These are very difficult things to measure by not doing this kind of testing because we don't get real-world data. But by simulating and emulating, we can find out exactly how many people clicked on that link, exactly how many people installed that payload. We can find out how well did our email and content and malware filtering solutions work. Was the red team able to get a payload through the email filter? How many tries did it take? Did we detect it? Did we alert on it? Next comes establishing a foothold. So the attacker is going to initially compromise a system. They're going to deploy malware, establish command and control, and establish persistence into your environment. And here, where this kind of testing can help us is, well, exactly how well do all of these so-called next-generation security technologies that we all pay dearly for actually work against a real-world targeted attacker? I will tell you, the first time that you pay big money to have a red team exercise done and none of your entire security technology stack actually fires off a single alert, it's a very eye-opening experience for you and raises a lot of questions for your vendors. Next, the attacker is going to escalate privileges, local or remote vulnerability exploitation, finding unsecured credentials. Again, where this kind of testing can help you. Do we appropriately manage credentials in the organization? Have you given your employees a way to securely manage their credentials or store them? If you haven't, chances are there's text files laying around with usernames and passwords, and a red team is going to find those and be able to deal with that before the bad guys do. And next begins sort of a cycle of internal recon, lateral movement, and maintaining presence as the attacker moves through your environment. Really, where this kind of testing can help us here is essentially, well, how well does our capability work to detect an active compromise in our environment? Do we have the use cases and processes in place to detect that activity and report on it or alert on it? And then lastly, complete the mission. So this is when the attacker is going to take the information from your environment and send it out to the internet, exfiltrate the data. And unfortunately, if the attack reaches this phase, you're probably not going to be able to stop it. But again, what we need here is a tried, tested, and true incident response plan where everybody at every level of the organization knows their roles and responsibilities like the back of their hand in the event of an incident. All right, okay. And lastly, I just want to leave you with one thing. If the worst does happen, because incidents are going to continue. There's going to be breaches, there's going to be misconfigured APIs, there's going to be S3 buckets put on Amazon and leaking client data. And when these kind of things happen, we need to hold our peers at other organizations accountable. But we also need to practice empathy, collaboration, and communication with them. Because I've noticed a pretty disturbing trend over the last few years, and some may argue with me that it's always been there, where we seem to blame the victim a lot of the time when they have a breach. And I can't really think of another industry or another crime where it's so common to victim blame. So we saw this, for example, with Equifax. When Equifax had their breach, some individuals discovered that their CISO had a formal education in music and then decided to essentially relentlessly attack the credibility of that individual and try to ruin her entire career because she was at the helm when a breach happened, and clearly because she went to music school 30 years ago, she doesn't know what she's doing. And if you spent any time on InfoSec Twitter or any other of our wonderful communities like that, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. You'll see this when the next breach happens. But I guess my message to you is really, if you're just starting out in this industry, if you're a student, if you've been here a while, I think it's incredibly important that we practice three values. Because I guarantee you the adversaries are doing this. They have their forums and their use groups and their mailing lists, and there's no pretense. They continuously talk about their challenges, their weaknesses, and share information and intelligence on how to compromise their organizations, and they do that so much better than us. Because of this kind of toxic climate we've created, it's created a chilling effect, I think, in our industry a little bit, and there's two problems with that. Number one, it just makes us bad humans, but two, we're very unlikely to share and talk openly about our challenges and our weaknesses with one another. And you see this, you go down to Vegas, you go to the big conferences, everybody wants to talk about the latest and greatest offensive exploit or this and that, and you will talk openly about that, but try to ask somebody, hey, what are you not doing well in your organization? And nobody's going to talk to you. So I would encourage you, please, over the next 2 days at this conference, at any other conferences that you go to, have those conversations with your peers. I guarantee you we're all facing the same similar set of challenges. And if we do that, then I really do think that we have a pretty good chance of turning the tide and getting in front of this thing. So with that, I'd like to thank you very much for listening, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have about the breach, about our response, or anything in the presentation.
All right, so what we'll do for questions, we kind of realize that we need a mic to go running here. So if you have questions, we'll just ask you, just quickly come to the stage. We probably got time for about 1 or 2. So if someone can come up here, someone's got to have some type of question. Yeah, come on up. And then just ask it through the mic, and then we'll pass the mic back to Matthew here.
Matthew, thank you for the presentation. For the use of third-party bug bounty programs, what are your thoughts on the maturity scale of the organizations and before consuming that kind of services?
So that's a great question. One of the things, when we first decided that we were going to launch a bug bounty program, we told this to our board. And the question was, they looked at me like I was an alien. Like, you want to invite hackers to attack us? Isn't that going to go horribly wrong? And the short answer is it can. But I think the key there is if you use a managed platform such as HackerOne or BugCrowd or anybody like that, you can actually set yourself to be an invite-only program where you can slowly invite only reputable, known people on the service with high signal ratio that have a lot of experience, and you can control the flow of researchers participating in your program and ensure that you don't get overwhelmed. Because I agree, if you launch this and you were an immature organization and then you opened up the floodgates and you can't keep up with remediating the vulnerabilities, it's going to get potentially very bad for you very quickly. But they do give you that ability to kind of control that flow, which is a fantastic feature. That's what we did. We worked to ramp up very slowly from, at the beginning we had 4 researchers, now we have 4,000. So. Oh, okay. Okay, thank you very much.